are literally shaping the planet.
Purpose is the only pathway to a regenerative future.
We have a choice to stay with the status quo or to change.
What is the point of trying to be just resilient when we can actually innovate?
It's good to be here with all of you today. I'm going to basically tell you a little bit of a personal story and bring you up to date on some things I'm seeing out in the world. And then I'll have some time at the end if anyone has questions or wants to engage about anything I'm covering. So I want to start by telling a story. About 12 years ago, I hit a wall. I've been in this business for a long time, and I just couldn't launch one more product or vapid marketing campaign. I knew I needed to use my storytelling skills for some greater good. So I left my big job at a large global communications agency to start my own sustainability firm. And I asked myself, did I want to wake people up, or did I want to work with those who were already awake? And I decided to work with those who saw what I did more than a decade ago, that respecting the planet and building an equitable society through commerce is full of possibility for innovation and creativity and success if we define success beyond profits. Now, certainly today, corporatism is creating many negative outcomes, like pollution and deforestation and pay inequity. And we have especially neglected the commons. These are the shared resources that none of us own, but we all depend on: air, water, ecosystems and habitats, and social systems like education and healthcare and the arts. We now have a system with a near singular focus on profit and the accumulation of wealth, and it's simply not working for the majority of us. So can we envision a future where the entire planet is our commons and the well-being of humanity is our responsibility? I think the answer is yes, and. So the ampersand is my favorite symbol, and yes and is my life philosophy. So what does yes and look like? It looks like a good Midwestern Catholic girl. I married my college boyfriend, started my communications career, had two beautiful little girls, and like half the nation, I got divorced. After several years as a single mom, I met the love of my life, and I married her. And even though for me, everything in my life seemed exactly the same, I had a spouse, kids, a great career, went on family vacations, nothing was the same. Not in the mid-90s. Now, married to a woman, I was often marginalized by the very system that I had been comfortably inhabiting. I couldn't see that the institutions and systems I'd sort of taken for granted, like marriage and a heteronormative workplace where sharing news about your spouse felt comfortable, until I was suddenly outside of them, married to a woman. It's strange, but coming out in my mid-30s gave me the gift of insight, because I saw how false social constructs really are. When you're forced out of your place in the world, you see there's benefit to interrogating the status quo, and you get to see reality from a different perspective, one that's more inclusive and adaptive, one that sees the invisible. So what is the invisible? It's homophobia, structural misogyny, institutional racism, privilege, climate change. So I'm grateful that the truth I experienced 25 years ago made me a yes and thinker. Everything was the same and nothing was the same. We are living in a rapidly changing world where social systems, hyper innovation cycles, cultural shifts, and population growth is happening exponentially. Amid all the cacophony of change, what is also emerging is a new global cohort of young people who are embracing a non-binary identity. They are providing a roadmap of how to step outside of the constraints of ones and zeros in order to consider a more expansive set of solutions and innovations and systems. Everything is possible in a non-binary world. This is yes and thinking. To lead in these changing times, non-binary thinkers need to have the capacity to embrace the truth of what is broken, pivot as fast as you can to redefine success, and deeply embed purpose at the heart of commerce. So in a big circle, yes and sort of way, I recently rejoined that big global agency I used to work for. They had their own epiphany and now have pivoted to becoming a purpose consultancy. I was asked to come and lead an effort helping corporations, large and small, see how embodying purpose is the only pathway to a regenerative future. And although policy hasn't kept up in helping protect the commons, there is mounting pressure inside corporations and companies that is driving real change. I see this in boardrooms every day. This non-binary Gen Z we've been talking about, they're exerting pressure. That's because they are the customers and employees and increasingly shareholders. Many of these employees receive shares of the companies they work for. They become instantly activist shareholders. They are the new adults entering the workforce. They're younger than my daughters are now. In fact, in 5 years, they will make up a third of the workforce. And they are a distinctly different cohort than any that's come before them. According to research we did in 2019 about this cohort, they are remarkably consistent in their beliefs across the globe. This is fascinating to me. These beliefs are shared within this generation from country to country. It's something we haven't seen before, and it's based on this globalization of the generation that is enabled by technology. Very, very consistently, they believe in collective action and they value systems and institutions like government and business. They actually believe in them and trust them. They just want them to work the way they're supposed to. They are actually remarkably hopeful because they believe in their own collective power. 94% believe humanity needs to come together to make progress on important issues. 93% say if a company makes a commitment, it should have the appropriate policies and programs in place that back up this commitment. And 75% will do their research, dig into what you're saying on your website, in your policies and your programs to make sure you are walking your talk when it comes to taking a stand on an issue. They will check you out. This generation isn't going to wait for policymakers to correct corporations' bad behaviors. For them, purpose is their driver, not profit. They are customers. They are not consumers. They are citizens and customers, not consumers. And businesses are going to have to start treating them this way. Because if they don't, this generation will protest, activate, organize, or they'll quit. So when a business looks squarely at its single greatest problem that it's creating, through the lens of environmental or social good. That's where there's an opportunity for real innovation. I mean, personally, we're all trying, I know I am, to remember to bring my reusable bag, well, not anymore when you go into stores due to COVID, to walk or bike more, maybe add solar to our roof, to eat more plants, use less water. But imagine you're $100 billion corporation. You have millions of customers and tens of thousands of suppliers. And you've had your personal epiphany as a leader. You get it. You are awake. How do you simultaneously change your company, wake up your customers, and move fast? Sometimes you innovate. Sometimes creative destruction is needed. This means dismantling your current business model while simultaneously building a new one in its place. Because as the world inevitably shifts in this waking up, climate crisis, human reckoning, corporations can either change itself, be forced to change reactively, or cease to exist. And there are companies that are doing this. Let's look at a couple of them. Impossible Burgers. We work with Impossible Burgers. They're a remarkable company. They were created to fight climate change through a business that delivered plant-based foods. The intention is to deconstruct the meat industry and the corn feed system that supports it and creates and contributes to constant ecosystem degradation. When Impossible was first launched, it was seen as a niche product aimed at a small portion of vegans and vegetarians, but it's now mainstream at every fast food restaurant, starting with the Impossible Whopper at Burger King and in almost every grocery store throughout the country. Creative destruction. Destroy a business model while simultaneously building a new one in its place. Mattel. Mattel is Barbie's company. This is the company that owns Barbie. And they've just launched a new Creatable World dolls line who look like real kids in the world. New kids in this non-binary generation, because all of these dolls have short hair and a wig of long hair. They have a wardrobe befitting any fashion-conscious kid, hoodies, sneakers, graphic tees, t-shirts in yellows and greens, not pinks and blues, and tutus and camo pants. Yes to Barbie and yes to non-binary dolls. PCC is a high-touch grocery chain in the Seattle market, and they're choosing to stay only in Seattle. That is their strategic business intent. They are focusing on deepening their local presence and resisting the capitalist push to grow, grow, grow. They're making a commitment to its members and its customers by expanding their deepening commitment to the local community. And what they're doing to preserve themselves as a local marketplace, sourcing local foods, they've created the Land Trust, and they identify local farmland throughout the greater Seattle, Tacoma area, farmland that has been earmarked for development. They buy that land, that farmland, back through Land Trust, and then they get it rezoned to conservation status, thereby preserving the land for generations of farmers. Target's Cat and Jack line is a line of adaptive clothing for kids with special needs. It features clothes that have no labels for kids who have tactile sensitivities and easy clothing access for kids in wheelchairs. They're using business and design innovation for the products they make that are addressing a social need for inclusion. Another example is Meijer, the Meijer grocery store chain. They've created an app called Flash Food. It aims to lessen grocery store waste because it allows shoppers to keep track of items such as meat or produce or deli items or even bakery products that are close to their sell-by date, and you can get it at a discount. It encourages shoppers to come in and shop differently, thereby ensuring that items that are going to expire get bought and consumed and not wasted. Last example is actually a collective of companies and ad agencies from Madison Avenue who've come together in a coalition called Brands for Good. We're a part of this coalition. These are the largest advertisers in the world, the largest consumer packaged good companies and Madison Avenue agencies who understand that collectively we have all created this consumption economy, this consumption society that we live in. And they recognize the power of their advertising platform to reverse this process and create culture change. They've committed to using their platform for reinventing products, business models, and processes and get society ready, behavior change, culture change for these new ways of doing business. The idea is to educate consumers how to be ready for products that are different, refillable containers rather than throwaway containers, products that you easily disassemble so they can be recycled more completely, marketing campaigns that celebrate diversity and collaboration and help heal divides. In 1927, Paul Mazur was a Wall Street banker working for Lehman Brothers. This is 1927. He said, quote, "We must shift America from a needs to a desires culture. People must be trained to desire, to want new things, even before the old have been entirely consumed," unquote. I think we see this now for what it really is, an unsustainable and unfulfilling way of being. The younger generation is moving us to ask not what is your bliss, but what is your purpose? We are rapidly waking up to the reality that our commons is in peril, and we need to move to a place where we're caring for our shared resources. It isn't about rugged individualism anymore. It's about caring for each other. We can let go of the paradigms and structures we're so accustomed to that we don't see them anymore. Privilege, supremacy and domination, untrammeled capitalism, to begin to see something new. To begin to see what Sebastian Junger says in his book Tribe, quote, "Belonging to society requires sacrifice, and that sacrifice gives back way more than it costs." That sense of solidarity is at the core of what it means to be human. It may also be the only thing that allows us to survive, unquote. Seeing and acting are required. Start by asking the question, which I ask in boardrooms all the time. Does the world need what you're making? And then ask, how are we making it? What are we making it with? Who are we making it for? What happens to it when it's done? Every single one of these questions is a giant ethical imperative that every corporation needs to be thinking about and considering. I'm asking you, go back to your businesses and be agitators, because to meet this moment that we are in, we need everyone, everywhere, reinventing everything. It will require openness, willingness, courage, and grace. It will take a non-judgmental binary way of seeing the world, to step out of these systems we are all in, to interrogate the truth of our place in capitalism and commerce, innovation, and belonging to each other. Let's meet this young generation where they are, activated, collaborative, forced to accept the challenge of the moment, yes, and still hopeful. I hope I've given you some things to think about today. I hope I've given you some inspiration. There are many companies, individuals, groups, and teams doing amazing things. You too can do amazing things with the environments you're building, the spaces you're creating, the systems you're designing. I appreciate my time with you today, and I'm happy to take any questions, and would love to hear from any of you who would like to reach out. My information is there.
All right, so we do have a few minutes before our next talk. So if you all have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. You should see that at the bottom of your screen. And we have enough space where we can probably take 1 or 2 questions. You can also write your question in the chat and I'll be able to see it. We have a couple of options. I don't have any questions, Sandy, but I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that presentation.
You're welcome.
It was touching. It was confirming. I'm not a part of the Gen Z.
Yep.
I'm firmly a millennial, but
Yes.
I do see that spirit that you've mentioned with that younger generation coming up and how it's creating so much change, not only in the world, out in the world, but it's going to create much change as the mass of them start to enter the workplace.
That's right. That's right. And I think that's always my message to people in whatever sector I'm talking to is this is pervasive across all types of businesses and throughout the world. So you will find this generational cohort attitude in Dubai as easily as you'll find it in Detroit. And as communicators and folks who've been studying demographics, that is new. We've never seen such an attitudinal cohesion across geographies that has been persistent. So it's surprising to us, which tells me that a certain kind of change is coming globally. And we're already seeing it in the protests that take place all over the world. And and it was certainly created through technology, social media, for sure, but just the globalization of culture also.
Right. And I'm glad you touched on the social media. I was actually talking to someone earlier today, a friend of mine who's younger. And I told her, I was like, you all grew up. I was like, I'm part of the generation that was analog to digital. You're the digital natives. And so you guys grew up with social media, whereas I got it as an adult. And so it's a very different level of connectivity when you've always had that and you've always had that level of access. And that's how you've seen the culture shift and change. And so it's amazing. So someone has a question. Do you see the challenges you've talked about requiring to be addressed uniquely in prop tech as compared to others, or is it just more of a global kind of phenomenon that you're seeing?
The challenges as it applies to what specifically?
So some of the challenges that you mentioned as you were talking about things around like climate change, the way young people are going to be entering the workforce and kind of lifting the veil on the things that we don't want to see within our society.
Right.
All
of it. It is not, it exists everywhere. I work with companies in business services, retail, food, the built environment, financial services, governments, NGOs, everywhere. We are living in a world that is waking up to the realities of an environment that isn't as stable as we expected it to be in terms of weather events and environmental challenges. I live in California, so we see fires and all sorts of environmental instability, which affects the resiliency of business and society. We're also seeing an awakening to the systems that have disproportionately affected Black and brown people, and we now see the systems that have promulgated the type of inequalities that various people suffer from. So when I'm doing DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and justice consulting inside companies, what we talk about is the society has its systems, but businesses have their systems, and they've just been invisible to many of us because we all live in them. But now that we see them, we can't go back. And one point I want to make to a comment you made earlier, Anastasia, about this young group that grew up digital. What is starting to emerge in the Gen Zs as they grew up in digital is a hunger for an analog world. And I think we'll see as this generation grows up, more and more of opting out of some of the digital that they were immersed in as children, because it doesn't provide the sort of richness that the analog, physical, in real life world does. So those are signs I'm looking for in terms of what's coming.
Awesome. Okay, we got one last question.
Sure.
Since there is a movement for so many companies to be more transparent in their purpose and motives, what does this mean for the label B Corp?
Well, I think so let me start by saying yes. When I talk about those big questions, does the world need what you're making? That gets to the heart of your purpose. As a brand strategist, we used to call purpose the thing that your company makes uniquely, that's uniquely yours. That's your purpose, the sort of singular thing you give customers. What we're seeing now is that purpose is defined as how does what that thing you make contribute to the greater good. The greater good could be helping regenerate the ecosystems of the planet. It could also be helping create greater cohesion in our societal fabric, where you might be creating spaces where people can more easily come together and be in community to one another, things like that. That's your purpose. Talking transparently about the challenges you face to be an environmentally responsible and socially just company, that's what we're talking about. Being transparent of where you are and how you're doing is imperative. A B Corp is a specific type of framework that you can choose to use to help describe the progress you're making against your goals and the targets you might be setting for your environmental, social, or governance performance. And it's a good framework. I would say to you, whether you become a B Corp or not, but that's what those data points I was telling you about, this emerging generation of your customers, your employees, your shareholders, they're going to be looking for you to talk transparently about how you're doing. And it's why I always try to use that example of, look, we try as individuals, and our lives aren't perfectly environmentally sound or perfect, nor are corporations. We're all on a journey. We're all working again together collectively on systems that need a lot of work. So let's just talk about how we're doing. That's really what transparency is. Come at it with humility, come at it with authenticity, come at it with creativity, and the market will give you some grace because the world needs all of us working together.
And I think on that note, it's the perfect note to end it.
Good.
Yeah. So
Good,
I want to
good.
thank you again, Sandy, for
My pleasure.
hanging out with us. And we're going to transition into our next speaker.
All right. It was great being with you all today.